Welcome to the Boring AI Show, the podcast for people who want to understand AI beyond the headlines. We talk about the useful, messy, funny, and very human side of bringing artificial intelligence into the real world. Now, here are your hosts, Tim and Tally.
All right. Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Boring AI Show. We have a really interesting topic to talk about today, and I'm really curious to see where this conversation goes. But the high-level topic of today is really the crux of AI and AI's impact on critical thinking. And so I'm joined today by Tim, of course, who's going to introduce our guest here as well.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you, Tally. So I'm really looking forward to this discussion. This guest, Jessy, and I have had AI discussions outside of the podcast. And so looking forward to sharing our chat here. So Jessy, let me introduce you here. So Jessy Jordan is professor of philosophy at Mount St. Mary's University in Emmitsburg, Maryland, the second oldest Catholic university in America. He is the director of the Mount's Common Integrated and Sequenced Liberal Arts Core Curriculum. And we're really excited to have you here today, Jessy.
Thanks so much, Tim. I really appreciate the invite, and I'm excited to explore some of these issues with you.
Yeah, and I was debating whether or not we should have like interludes of "Everything is Awesome" playing in the background, and then if you saw Lego Movie 2, you know that there is the "Everything's Not Awesome" song as well. So
these songs capture pretty perfectly the sort of polarized emotions on AI in our society at the moment.
Yes, they do. In fact, maybe Lego Movie is perhaps on many levels, a very good analogy here. So, but anyway, Tally, keep us on track.
Let's do it. Let's get kicked off here. So, in the prep leading up to this episode, it sounded like, we always do our AI in the news, but it sounds like Tim and Jessy actually have happen to have the same news story today. So, Tim, I'll start it over with you, and then Jessy, I'm curious, your guys' thoughts on the same topic or news article.
Yeah, so a lot has happened since our last recording. It seems like, and it's not the like, oh, there's new models, there's new like tools, there's new this, that. No, it's actually like real social movement. And so everything from the Barnes & Noble CEO saying he's okay with selling AI-generated books, which created quite the stir, to the Pope, which is what I was going to talk about today, and apparently Jessy was going to talk about the same thing. The Pope putting out a very detailed, as we were talking about, thoughts on AI. And one, for me, as soon as I was reading the headlines, I'm like, this doesn't sound right. And this is a great example. As I was talking to my wife about it, she's like, well, just have ChatGPT summarize it for you. Like, haha. And that's clearly, I feel like, what a lot of these headlines are. So basically, actually, Jessy, why don't you give some context, if you want, from what you've heard about it?
Oh, sure. So I was eagerly anticipating the release of the Pope's encyclical. It's his first encyclical of his pontificate. And so I did not have ChatGPT summarize the whole thing for me. I slogged through all about 43,000 words of it. I guess I'll just, two things in particular struck me. The first was just what I would call the Pope's moral vision that was animating his approach to the whole issue of AI in society. And I was struck by, like, almost as a touchstone, almost on every single page, the Pope keeps coming back to this importance of trying to promote the development of the fully formed human being, and then to try to like think really hard about how those fully formed human beings are empowered to live lives consistent with their human dignity, right? And it's almost as a refrain again and again, he comes back to that. And I actually think that's a really helpful way to kind of step back and to try to begin getting one's feet under oneself with respect to thinking about these technologies that are having huge societal and social impacts, right? And for someone like the Pope, it's sort of like the main kind of criterion for judging is, let's think about human development, what is going to contribute to rich, full development of whole human persons, right? And then this bit about human dignity. And it strikes me that it's sort of worth noting here that that kind of moral vision is really different from a moral vision that sort of focuses in a utilitarian way, right? Where, aggregate good for the most number of people, right? Which might lead to you to sort of sacrifice some people for the sake of the, greater good. So I'm thinking of some comments that Sam Altman has made here. But what I would say is I think really important to the Pope's moral vision is this focus on human dignity and integral human development. And then I'll just say quickly, the second thing that stood out to me was the Pope's concern to try to draw attention to the monopolies of
Yes.
AI. And he's worried about this danger. This is such a sort of societal transformative technology. The danger of leaving that into the hands of a very few powerful individuals. And the Pope didn't say this. I'll just say this as a side. I think it's sort of important to think about this against the backdrop of something that Mark Zuckerberg has said in the past. He's tried to move beyond this, at least publicly, but it used to be the sort of internal Meta Facebook motto: move fast and break things, right? Yep. So, I think the concern about the monopolies of AI, right, and trying to think through how it is that we would bring this really transformational technology into the space of more democratic control, right? I think that those two things are sort of really significant parts of the encyclical.
Yeah, agreed 100%. And the fully formed human, as you were saying, and this idea of the way I always talk about it is like the magic humans bring. What's the magic humans bring? And I literally say it in those words. And I feel like, how do we amplify and discover that magic? Is one of the things that I really took from the Pope's commentary on this. Also, really, I was going to mention, but you beat me to the punch, around the monopoly aspect of this. And that you do have a small group of people who are really making a lot of decisions in the macro. Now, the reality is, when you get out of headlines and you go into, when we work with clients, nobody is living the vision that's being put forth by these AI companies. In fact, quite the opposite. There's a lot of, in our last episode, I think it was last episode, 2 episodes ago, whatever, we were talking about predictions of the future. And one of the things I said is, you can have a lot of angry people who feel like they were sold an empty bill of goods. You told me AI could do all this stuff, and where's my return? And it's not there. And so I do think that monopoly aspect is interesting and properly called out, thoroughly called out, and something that is very worth talking about. On the tech side, I know a lot of people are going to say, yeah, but that's where open source comes in. Except when you step back and look at who is leading the open source efforts, you really have a small group of companies who are putting out open source models, such as OpenAI, Meta, Google, and so, and then you have other companies like, I'm blanking on that, Mistral, that is in France, that's putting out models. You have Chinese models that are coming in, and everybody has concerns about various aspects there. So there is a lot of discussion and debate around, is it as monopolistic as it seems? I agree with the Pope. I think it is very monopolistic. That that is a huge mistake. And so just as a side note, I do want to mention there are organizations that are fighting against this and addressing this. And I've talked before about the Algorithmic Justice League, and I highly recommend people check out the Algorithmic Justice League. They are doing some really, really great work around AI fairness and helping understand AI bias and creating educational programs appropriately. Also, surprisingly, the state of Mississippi was very aligned with their recent educational program they just came out with AI. To the Pope's comments, it was a very interesting read to see kind of the alignment of the two, at least on paper. So, pretty interesting news cycle this past week. So, but Tally, what about you? You're not on the Pope.
I mean, yes, really interesting article. My article actually, this news story took place actually a few years ago, but I thought it really highlighted, one of the topics we talked about in the prep session for this, which is really around, and you guys kind of both touched on this too, how AI, whether it's the actual building of the AI solution, the implementation, or how AI is actually used, can really be a reflection of the either society or, business or organizations values that it's within. And so what I mean by that is the news article I was looking at, I'm not sure if you guys have heard about this. I just thought it just came back up again. And I thought this was a really interesting use case where IKEA used and created an AI chatbot that was able to effectively manage 47% of customer inquiries, which is great, but meant that a large portion of the customer service representatives, were essentially no longer needed. And so instead of choosing to, which might be a value to another organization, cut these jobs to cut costs at all costs, they reskilled 8,500 or so customer service representatives into interior design advisors or consultants, since they already had so much knowledge of the organization's products, their approach, and all this internal information. Why not leverage that and transform them into this revenue generating sector that now exists and has generated, I think in the first year, 1.4 billion additional revenue dollars for the organization. So again, I think this highlights, and I think this will segue actually into a large piece of our conversation around, is AI the one damaging perhaps critical thinking or creating these negative outputs, or is it how we're using AI that really is having these impacts? And so I guess on that note, I'd be curious to turn the floor over, Jessy and Tim, to you guys on how you're currently seeing AI and its impact on in your case, Jessy, students and critical thinking. And then we can talk about how that'll kind of impact the workforce and how AI is leveraged, across businesses.
Yeah. Tim, did you want to get in here first?
No, man, you go for it. I know you have a few things to say. So.
Well, I do. So, I mean, I guess one thing to start out with is just to say, I teach students regularly, and I'm sort of in the trenches of university education. And so a lot of what I say will just sort of come from the trenches, as it were. It will come from kind of that experience and talking to my colleagues, and then reading sort of stuff from colleagues across the nation. But so, I have concerns. I think that as a kind of thesis that I would lay out is just that AI is posing significant threats to university education. And I think, that's a kind of big general claim. I think it might be actually helpful to step back and say, well, if it's posing threats to university education, I mean, there's a preliminary question, and that is, what is a university education for, right? Like, what is it trying to accomplish, and to what degree may AI either sort of undermine those efforts or contribute to those efforts, right? And so I think, I'll just sort of say three kind of quick things that I think a university education is for. So first of all, a university education is for intellectual development and enrichment, right? How is it that we create or that we form students who are sort of deep, rich, subtle, sophisticated thinkers, right? Who can deal with complexity, who sort of run away from shallowness and superficiality, right? How do we sort of form students such that they have those kinds of intellectual skills, right? So I think that's like one really big goal of the university. And notice like that goal, I didn't say the goal of the university is to train people to enter a particular job force, right? Like that's
Yep.
a different vision of what a university education is for. I do think that if we form students to have a sort of deep, rich intellectual capacities, I think that they will then be able to move out into the workforce and do any number of things, right?
Yeah.
And so,
Can I jump in?
Yeah,
Jump
please,
in here on
Tim,
this, Jesse.
please.
So,
Yeah.
because I think this is a really important point. Like, university is not job training. Like, that's the way I say it. There is a value to education, about education. And there was a long period of time where the 4-year university degree was the checkbox that, and I totally was somebody who grew up professionally in this time. You had to have a 4-year university to be considered for a professional job. You had to, like, it was a checkbox you could not go beyond. That's not the case anymore. You have a lot of employers like the state of Maryland who has removed a college degree as a requirement for a lot of the jobs posted. Yet, as I play back, I knew a lot of developers in my career who were self-taught, and they were really good developers. They could write code very, very well, but they couldn't like talk to people. And they couldn't interact with executive teams, and they couldn't, have this like, wait a minute, I know the words you're saying are X, Y, and Z, but really what you're asking me for is A, B, and C. Like, it's because the words you're using is not what you're trying to do. And I do attribute that both to liberal arts education for myself, but also from 4 years of spending time debating and arguing and, having to assess what are people actually trying to say here. So I just wanted to highlight that as like, I agree. And also here's an example that I've lived through what you're describing.
Yeah. Thank you, Tim. I think that distinction is really, really important between, I am a true believer, big surprise, in the liberal arts, right? And so, the sort of liberal arts thinks that, look, it is worthwhile to create intellectually or to form intellectually rich human beings, right? Whether they go on for a job, whether they don't go on for a job, right? That somehow that activity is worthwhile in itself. So I think, so then the question is, to what degree on the ground is AI either contributing to that goal or frustrating that goal? So I'll just say two other quick goals that I think a university education is for. One is citizenship, right? There's a long tradition of thinking about what sort of intellectual formation does a citizen need to move into their society and be a meaningful political actor, right? And, we live in a very complicated, pluralistic, representative republic. And so, giving the students the sort of historical depth, right, and critical reasoning depth to be able to move out into a complicated society and to understand the various forces that are operative on them, and to be able to safeguard democracy, for example. These things are really important. And then that suggests a certain kind of intellectual formation in order to accomplish that goal. And then finally, a third goal that I think, and this really is coming from my own university. My own university has formulated this goal, and it is brilliant. Basically, the thought is that the liberal arts try to liberate us in a certain way. And sort of one of the projects that we're up to at the Mount is liberating students from passive acquiescence to the cultural forces operative on them. That I think is a really exciting project, right? So our students, we need to educate them to even first understand what kind of cultural forces are operative on them. And then we need to give them the kind of frameworks where they can critically evaluate those cultural forces, right? And so I would say that a university education, certainly a liberal arts university education, is sort of focused on intellectual development, citizenship, and liberation from those kinds of forces. So then, I think the follow-up question to bring it to our topic today just is like, okay, what's AI doing with respect to our ability to accomplish those goals? I don't know. Do you want me to stop there, Tim and Tally?
I love that. Well, it's so interesting. As you're speaking through this, my mind immediately goes to how would AI, to your point, Jess, how would AI benefit or help students achieve those goals and also limit them or their ability to get to those end goals. But I really like, especially when we're talking about liberal arts, I think obviously trade, there's so many different other types of education that can help you accomplish, maybe whether it's a trade or a set job or healthcare. But in the liberal arts world, I completely agree. I think that makes a lot of sense. And I'm curious, Jessy, to hear how you're seeing AI impact those goals. Because I think really, again, I guess getting back to my point earlier, I think how we use AI is really the critical piece, not just the AI exists in general, but I think how folks are using and approaching and thinking about AI, perhaps that's the crux of the issue is what I'm hearing. But I'm curious.
Yeah. I would also like to layer onto that of where I'm going with that is, do the students know that's why they're there? Like, or do they think that's why they're there? And because where I go with this is from a problem set perspective, I'm thinking business problems. We show up and people are like, we need to reduce the call length here. Actually, Zappos is a great example, or back in the day, is a great example of this. We need to keep customer call length down. We need to get people off the phone and, move churn. But Zappos came around, if I remember this correctly, flipped that script and said, no. We want the people to feel deeply valued when they're on the phone and like listened to and cared for, and that's going to create a better brand experience. And so that if you have two groups who have divergent goals, then they run off to achieve their own goals. And so this is where I guess my question being, thing with Tally's question, but back to the foundational, do the students have the same goals as the university?
That's such a good question, Tim. In some cases they do, in some cases they don't. And look, historically we have done in some years a better job and some years a worse job of articulating what it is that we're up to at this particular university, right? It's never a good thing if students come in and they're surprised by these fundamental goals. Because maybe it's not what they were looking for, right? Maybe they were looking for something more along the lines of a sort of very narrow vocational or professional training, right? It's a really good question, Tim. what I will say is culturally, in America, right? If you were to survey most parents and prospective students, right, that some of their fundamental goals for a university education is so that my child will be able to get a good job, right,
Yep.
a higher paying job, and typically that's been understood as the kind of great promise of a university education. And it turns out that all of that is still true, right?
Yep.
Um, but a liberal arts university really is working out of a different kind of paradigm, and there are all kinds of ways that those two different approaches to a university education do kind of come into conflict. But they don't have to, right? If you realize that, look, if you get a liberal arts education, you actually will be have the intellectual skills to be able to move out into the workforce and do all manner of thing. The other thing that I would add here is that the Bureau of Labor Statistics says that the average college graduate will have 12 different jobs, right? And so if you sort of think about that, if you are trained primarily for one specific job, that's not actually being very responsive to the reality of the job market that faces our students once they graduate, right?
Agreed.
So I think like a liberal arts degree makes someone much more adaptable, and much more sort of well suited with the intellectual skills to kind of go out and to be successful, right? But returning to Tali, what you were saying, you said you were interested in, whether AI is like contributing to this or undermining it. And then you were thinking about it like, well, maybe it's how it is that we use AI, right? So I'll put my cards on the table here. When I hear you say it might just be a matter of how we use AI. I think what that is expressing is a view that, well, technology is just kind of a neutral tool. We can sort of pick up the technology and we can either use it for good or for ill or something like that. And I guess I would just push back a little bit and say that I actually think that technologies come with a certain kind of drift or a certain kind of current. Tools come with a current. That would be my thesis here. So I actually don't think that tools are neutral, are simply neutral things. We might come back to that later, and that could be fine. But let me get more concrete here. In terms of like what it's like in the trenches as a university professor now, right? So if we're thinking about intellectual development, you all have heard me say this, I think the university is an intellectual gym. And so, what the students need to do is they need to come in and they need to do their intellectual reps, right? If they're not doing their intellectual reps, then their intellectual muscles, their intellectual capacities are not growing. And I think what many of us are worried about as university professors in the classroom is that the use of AI, right, really is translating into students outsourcing their cognitive work. And if students like continually outsource their cognitive work, right, they're just not getting the intellectual reps in. And this has transformed the college classroom. And we're all, as university professors, sort of reeling and trying to figure out, well, how is it that we challenge students to engage in their own cognitive work such that, right, they're sort of building that critical thinking capacities. So, and you might say, well, I don't know what you might say. I'll just say that, when students are at university and there's a lot of other things that they would like to be doing rather than, say, writing an ethics paper, right? that the temptations and the inducement to rely upon AI to do a great deal of that cognitive work, and we could get down into the distinct. Well, what cognitive work? There's critical thinking, but how do you break that down, and which particular intellectual activities, right?
Mhm.
But students are relying upon AI from the very beginning of the reflective process all the way through the sort of the end of that reflective process. And it is very difficult because of, who we are as human beings, and what we might want to be doing rather than what, we think would be actually good for us to be doing. Also the pressures. I mean, students realize, well, gosh, all these other people are using AI and they're getting good grades. I don't want to get left behind, right? So there are so many inducements for students to utilize AI for their own cognitive labor, that they're not doing the intellectual reps, right? So that's
Yeah.
one way to formulate a
Mhm.
really deep concern.
And it's interesting because I actually really like to your initial point, if there's a way to integrate that into the education and or workforce processes in terms of trying to better understand the inherent, you called it, I think, current or bias that all of these solutions have, because you're trained on a certain set of data. So that data inherently is going to have certain biases, because that's what humans have. And I actually have a friend right now, and he's doing a coding course. And in part of that that course, they actually ask you to use different AI solutions to get the same output, and then articulate what the different bias, or did they lean towards a certain language or process. And so you actually have to kind of use AI and critically think around, what the different tools that you have access to, what their bias is. And so I just thought that was a really interesting way to, if these tools are here, how do we better, how do we leverage them in a way where we're making sure that we're not just trusting them as an answer solution? I think we say this a lot, Tim, when we go on site to do different upskilling course.
Yep.
This isn't an answer machine. This is a thinking partner. And just with, if we were working together on something, I know that this person has this background, and so they're going to lean more towards, this area of expertise because that's what they gravitate towards, and so really understanding the bias of these solutions to help you better critically think. I don't know. I this is just me playing devil's advocate. So I'm curious if again, posing these tools in a different way might actually benefit students and members of the workforce.
Yeah, no, Tali, I really appreciate that line of thought. I think I agree with you. Like the case you raise, I think is super interesting. I guess what I would say is people like you, Tali, and Tim, your critical thinking skills have been honed and formed, right, prior to the existence of AI,
Yeah.
right? Like, so, I mean, your ability to reflect at these sort of way more kind of sophisticated levels, and to utilize AI in a sort of critically informed way, right? I think you're right. We need to teach students how to do that. But there are a whole lot of sort of cognitive critical thinking skills that need to be in place before you get to that level of reflection. And so I don't know, here's a crazy idea. Like, what would happen if we did 3 years at the university AI free, and then in the 4th year, right, we sort of thought really hard then about how to sort of teach our students or train our students to interact effectively with AI, given the kind of tool that it is, right? I'm not necessarily proposing that. What I'm trying to highlight here are the sort of prior intellectual skills that are threatened by the reality that students are just doing this cognitive offloading in ways that is breathtaking. And then when we get some of these students sort of at the tail end of their university education, at least some of us are worried that they're not able to sort of critically engage in the way that they used to be, right?
No,
Yeah.
I think that brings up a good point. And also how we manage this next generation that maybe is relying on that. And so do we have processes where there are certain outputs that AI cannot be involved in? I think that that's a fair question to ask. And I'm sorry, Tim, I just interrupted you.
No worries at all. Like I do feel very inclined to highlight that I appreciate the comment, Jesse, that Tally and I have well-formed critical thinking skills, and the assumption there, in line. But I mean, I literally see this in people every day in the workforce today, and I don't mean like these kids today. Like that's not what I'm talking about. I was in a meeting the other day where there was a executive who was talking about a consulting firm that they worked with, and that they consistently were getting, when there was a meeting and they paid a lot of money for these consultants to be in the meeting, what their perception was is they took notes in the meeting and then turned those notes into a PowerPoint deck and handed the PowerPoint deck back. And the executive statement is, I can have Copilot do that for me. I don't need to spend thousands of dollars for that.
Yeah.
Similarly, I've been in many, many, many meetings where it is clear people who have been doing their job for many, many years, like literally just threw in a prompt to Copilot, or AI tool of choice, got an answer, and then said, "Here you go." No interaction with what came out, no validation, no checking. And again, like, so it's, I guess where I'm going with this is it's not just the students. This is, we are seeing this across the board. And we've seen this pre-AI behavior as well. Because that consultant behavior I was just talking about, we hear that all the time from people of like, one of the things they like about working with us versus others. It's not just a regurgitation of what was produced. So I do think across the board, I don't want to speak globally, but in a lot of places that in the United States, we do have a major crisis with education. Henry Rollins, and for those who don't know, punk rock star Henry Rollins and philosopher, and just all around very fascinating human. He had this long interview with Pharrell Williams about the guy who sings "Happy" and in "Despicable Me," among other things. And he was talking about the biggest threat to America right now is the lack of education and the lack of prioritization of education. And I am a big fan of the idea of we need to help people learn how to think and then use their tools to amplify how they think and amplify what they're doing. And so I laughed a little bit when you said your concept of like, I don't know, maybe we have a few years without AI and then we have, with AI. I think that's a great idea, except I would encourage those first few years, no mobile phone either, no smartphone, cut them off. Like, because this, again, AI we have a compounding technology situation happening here. So, personal computers, that was great, but then we got the internet. And so we could have vast amounts of data that we're shipping like instantaneously all around the world. And then we get mobile. And now it's like, well, you literally have a supercomputer in your pocket at all times. And now you have, on top of that, the social media and cloud computing craze where infrastructure, don't worry about infrastructure. You can spin up an entire company in literally a click. You can get fired up and ready to go. And now on top of that, and by the way, all that data, we've used that to create artificial intelligence systems that you can just talk to at any point, just like anyone else you could call. So
yeah, Tim, let me make a crazy claim that I almost believe. And that is, if as a university we turned off the internet, we would be able to accomplish our university goals far more effectively with students. But that's crazy, right? Of course, we're not going to ever do that. But so a quick story about one particular student. So many of us as professors, in order that students get those intellectual reps, right? Many of us are adopting strategies of having students do in-class handwritten responses that are guided to make sure that they're doing those intellectual reps. So in one of my classes, I have students do a kind of series of 3 in-class writings, and then I have them take it home and compose a paper out of that material that they've already written. A student submitted that work, and I had this student's sort of pre-work, and then I saw what the student produced, and I had some reasons for thinking that AI significantly helped this student. And I told the students that they weren't allowed to use AI on this particular assignment. The student came in and admitted to using AI. And what the student said is, I just find that I'm not able to organize my thoughts, right? I'm not able, even though I had these separate things that you led us through, and they're a series of scaffolded writing assignments. When I had to go home and think through how to put this into an ordered, organized whole, right, that sort of prosecuted an argument throughout the course of a paper, the student said, I am just really bad at doing that. I can't do that. And it's not surprising if a student doesn't practice that kind of intellectual activity over and over and over and over again. It's actually difficult to do that successfully. I worry about that, and I don't worry about it because I don't. It's not so much about the product, right? It's about the person and the kind of intellectual formation that they are receiving, right? It's like, well, yeah, you can have AI create a fancy product out of this material and just give it to me, but as educators, we don't so much care about the product; we care about the formation of the person. And so, if that's what you really value a university education for, then AI is presenting significant threats to that kind of intellectual formation.
I would add to that a different scenario. We recently were working with a group who, and actually I can even take out the recent group. There was a Claude Code event, Anthropic's development tool, Claude Code. And there was an event, they had a lot of developers there. And one of the questions that was asked was, do you review the code that comes out of Claude? And in general, the answer was no. Like, no, not really. Because we're solopreneurs and we're sprinting forward and we have this great product idea and we're taking it to market and building this out. And on YouTube, the AI bro and Tally has heard me go off about this environment of influencers. They're like, oh, well, yeah, just build your company and you can get going. But you have people who are doing things they can't do with AI, and they have no concept of, is it right? Or where should I challenge? Or where should I be looking? For instance, if you're a software developer, you should generally know there are certain packages that you can put in, code development packages into your code that are safe and some that are not. Did you check that your AI system didn't put in anything untoward into your system? And people aren't. And so, so again, going back to, this is a behavior we're seeing even outside of university, where people are just, AI is the easy button. And I hit that easy button and it creates me this thing. And I don't validate it. I don't check it. I don't need to. Why should I? I can just trust the machine. It's like, dude, you're setting up a dystopian movie. Like, come on, man. We've all seen this movie. Like, you know not to do that. But Tally, I know, as we've been out in the field, like you've seen this as well, like, and kind of that overconfidence in the AI system.
Well, and it's funny because I think that overconfidence really equals lack of confidence in the human, and I think that's part of the issue. You have to have space to fail and to maybe say, just like in the case of your student, I'm not really good at this, but here's my best shot. And like you said, it's, you got to grow the muscle. You have to have chance. Wow, the very first paper I produce versus what I'm able to write now, and see the difference there. But that takes time to grow, and I think it's the patience and we have something at Mind Over Machines where we call, we say core competency, like really recognizing what are your strengths. Maybe these aren't my strengths, but I really need to work on that, and that means you're going to probably suck at it at first. And that's okay, and being comfortable with failing to an extent. I think it's all these things are intertwined. And how do we give space for that, not only in the education world, but also in the business space? How do we make sure that new employees and interns have space to trust themselves and lean into their strengths and also build on areas that they can improve. So, I know that's I know we're coming up here to the closing statements, or we're going to go through some AI use cases, but I think that's really I don't know if you guys have any final words to say to the audience as they move forward, but I think it's really just trying to make space for, whether you're in business or education, for your students or for your workforce to be human and to fail and to grow and to just continue learning and really, value that, because that really does have such a large payoff. Yeah, that's what I'm hearing.
Yeah, Talia, I think what you said about the worry about the loss of confidence in one's own personal judgment, I think that's so right on. And one of the things about a university education is hopefully that by the time a student gets to the end, they actually have a sense of their own competence and their own judgment, and to be able to rely upon that, right, in the right contexts. And I worry that if AI is always a constant companion every step of the way in this cognitive work, we're robbing students of that sense of personal sort of agency and competency.
And I would add to that, what happens when you go to a new job that doesn't have these tools? I mean, a lot of companies are still in the, hey, we're going to drastically limit what you can do with these tools. And so if you can't produce outputs with them, and I'm thinking of a few clients that we've worked with that are fairly significantly ahead on the AI curve compared to others, they drastically limit the AI use because of the nature of the data that they're working with. They can't have it going outside their systems. And so when you show up feeling like, oh, I can write code, I can do this, I can assess and analyze data. Well, can you? And without your sidekicks. And this is where I do think we are going to see a drastic surge in the demand for generalists, people who, like Jessy, like what we're talking about. I mean, this is one of the reasons Mind Over Machines is so into the liberal arts, is we see it coming. Like we need people who have the mental agility to do lots of different kinds of work and will have different constraints and tools to be able to do that work and adapt quickly to be able to live in new realities of like, well, in this client, you can do this, this, and this. And this other client, you can't even use those tools. And with this client here, you have to use their hardware, their software, everything, and you got to be able to transition between those environments seamlessly. It's not an easy task.
It's not. And I guess on that note, I'd like to, Tim and Jessy, if you guys have an AI use case that you do recommend, because I do think there are use cases that involve critical thinking, or maybe use cases that you think, AI should not be used there. I'd love to hear from you guys so we can give the audience a taste of, when AI might be appropriate, and what that looks like.
I don't know, Tally. I feel like we've talked a bunch. So why don't you kick us off?
All right, let's do it. So it's funny. I have a use case here, but part of me wants to change that and say, well, maybe I'll share two. One, I'm a very slow reader, and I know this about myself. But it doesn't mean I can't read and I take the time to read. But there are cases where sometimes it can be challenging, and so leveraging AI for summarization purposes from time to time. And again, it really depends on what you're looking at. If this is a legal document where I need to understand, or, you know, a statement of work, and I need to make sure I understand every single sentence and line of that document, not a good use case. But if I'm, you know, moving through the day and there's a news article that I don't have time to read all of it, but I want to get the highlights, just so that way I could speak to, you know, and have further discussion and things like that. That is a use case I found really helpful just for my learning style. I know that it allows me to get through content that other people can get through much faster. So I can speak to those things at the same rate as other folks. Obviously, time and place. The other AI use case that I did want to bring up today that I've been using AI for recently was AI for marketing and visual like slide creation. I just used it for I don't use this for client work, but I use this for, we have an internal company-wide meeting coming up where we're going to be presenting a few updates. And so I was curious what we use Miro, which we've talked about before on here, Miro boards to present. And so I created a few slides with that, and it gave a really great output, saved a lot of time. And then I went back in and made updates based on actually this design method that Tim and I were talking about the other day. So again, having the human skill set to be able to go in and say, you know, here are the different components that I want edited, but knowing what still looks good and what's on brand with us. I don't know. I had a lot of fun with that. So I just wanted to share that.
It's a cool use case.
Yeah.
So I feel like Miro, you know, we talk about them all the time on the podcast. We should definitely seek out sponsorships. I'm big fans of Miro.
All right. What about you guys?
What about you, Jesse?
Oh, I don't have anything good. I really liked your first use case, Tali. I'm also a dreadfully slow reader. And, you know, it does strike me that there are reasonable times when that sort of cognitive outsourcing can be very helpful, right? I do think one of the questions I would always ask myself is just like, okay, let's take a step back every time and ask, do I really want to outsource this cognitive work, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
And sometimes the answer is a legitimate yes. I do have one concern when I think about sort of my own habits. I do have a concern, like, it just seems like we're inundated with so much information, right? And I think, like, in this sort of information overload culture, like, there's a real temptation. Oh, I've got to be on top of this, and I've got to be on top of this, and I've got to be on top of this. And in order to be on top of that, I've got to use AI to summarize all of it, right? And then you're living in a sort of fast-paced, skimming across the surface of things, frenetic kind of intellectual world, right? And so I think that there are some dangers and temptations there. It's like, actually, the work of slow, careful, deep reflection, I think, is really important for us as human beings. And I think, given our information culture, there's sort of like the temptation to just keep skipping around, and then you never sort of get deep underneath the surface. So I would just like, I want to say yes, exactly, to your use case, and that sounds reasonable, but also with the caveat that the like, this is just for myself, warning for myself, don't actually feel like you need to be on top of it all, right? And make some intentional decisions about what is worth dwelling with and going slow through.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah.
Well, and that's why I love this podcast, because it gives us the time to actually talk through and almost verbally process some of the chaos of all that's going on, and just really, you know, pick one news article to focus on, or pick one topic to really discuss and hear different perspectives on. But I agree. I love that. And you know, Tim, I know that you always say that too. It's not only okay, but needed to say, I don't know at times. And that's how, again, that's how we learn and build that knowledge base.
I think that's going to be one of the most telling and critical statements of the 21st century. I don't have enough information about this topic to have an informed opinion.
Yes.
Like, the ability to, and the confidence to be able to say that is going to be huge. So I do think it's interesting that all three of us are talking about reading and summarization, and choosing when to outsource the cognitive load. And for me, the Pope, this was a use case for me. The reality is, I do not have time to sit down and plow through. I think it was like 240 pages of the Pope's thing, but I can listen nonstop. And so, as when I'm driving, because I'm in the age of dad cap, it's like run kids here, run kids there, do this, do that. And so, fitting it in. So I'm a fan of 11 Labs Reader. And so I was able to take 11 Labs Reader to read the Pope's document. You just paste in the link, reads it for you. It's pretty cool. Pretty useful. And I just saw this morning, I'm super excited about this, that Stan Lee from Marvel Comics, Stan Lee, his voice is now part of 11 Labs. So I could have had the Pope's document read to me in the voice of Stan the Man Lee. There's other voice, like Matthew McConaughey is in there. And that's another use case I think is really interesting around his whole copyright and trademarking of his brand. His voice, his catchphrases, his imaging. Taylor Swift is doing the same thing. I think that'll be a very interesting thing to watch too. So anyway, using 11 Reader to help me get through the Pope's document, which I found fascinating and enjoyable. Just, can't read while driving.
Yeah, it's not recommended.
Not recommended. I guess you could. I wouldn't encourage people to do that.
Yeah, no. Awesome. Cool. Well, thank you so much for being on this show, Jessy. I feel like we could do like 4 more episodes with you. There was so much content there, but it was a really fun, fascinating conversation. I love hearing about, what we're seeing in the higher education world, because a lot of times those folks end up being the workforce that Tim and I work with. And so hearing how we can streamline some of their ways of thinking is really helpful to us. So great conversation, and thank you guys for being here today.
Thanks again for having me, Tally and Tim. It was wonderful to speak with you.
Thank you, Jessy. I appreciate your insights.
Awesome. Well, thanks, guys, and feel free to reach out if you have another topic or you want to hear more from Jessy here. We could absolutely try to have him back for another episode if the demand is there. So thanks, everyone, and we'll see you guys next week.
Well, wait a minute, Tally, we didn't say like, subscribe, and comment, share.
Sorry, like, subscribe, comment, all the actions. We'll put it in the post.
All the actions. Got to do all the actions. Feed the algorithm. Exactly. And don't worry, this doesn't take much cognitive load.
Yeah.
Just click the button.
Exactly.
So.
God forbid. All right. Thanks,
everyone.
Thanks for joining us on The Boring AI Show. Practical AI minus the hype. Subscribe, share it with someone on their own AI journey, and we'll see you next time.